Hey, it's Mike from Go Cell Phone Repair, and this is the Thursday evening 6 o'clock Tech Talk live stream. We do this every week and also on Mondays at 2 p.m., barring any holidays or anything like that. So once or twice a week, you can join us here. We like to talk about things that are currently going on within the tech world. Phones, tablets, computer stuff, all the big companies, what they're doing, what's going on. And beyond that, try to answer any technical questions that we can. We have some great minds that come on here, people that own or work at phone repair stores that can hopefully answer a lot of questions that you might have. So let's get this thing started. Now, last Monday, was it last Monday or last Thursday? I want to say it was last Thursday. I started to do a stream and something went funny. I don't know what was going on, but last week the whole thing went sideways for some reason. I think I figured out the problem, but I had this whole thing prepared about the Apple battery thing that was going on. You know, people's phones being throttled because their batteries were old, and obviously that's all dated now. So I try to keep things current so we can kind of talk about things that are happening now in real time. You know, as of today, what's the latest thing that we know? Well, obviously, if you have an older iPhone, what we discovered over the last week and a half or so is that Apple has purposely been throttling phones, you know, slowing the processing speed down so that your phone really does run slower. And that is regardless of what kind of applications you have installed on it, and to an extent what operating system you're running, although if you've updated to 11.2, my understanding is that has made things worse. Well, in the last 7 days since we started that stream, I kind of just set most of that stuff aside because some new developments have come out. And yes, we will be talking about the SIM swap stuff that's going on and a whole bunch of other topics, but I wanted to just touch on this real quick because there's some new information out there. First of all, there are many lawsuits being filed at this time, and probably one of the more interesting ones is one that is going on in France, where they have legislation that is in place and calls planned obsolescence illegal. So you cannot purposely design something to fail after a certain period of time. In France, they have a law there that, you know, governs these kind of things. And of course, we'll have to wait and see when this goes to court, how that's going to turn out. But you know, there's a possibility that Apple might be found guilty of planned obsolescence because of this whole battery upgrade thing. And if you aren't really up to date with how that works, they have discovered that as batteries get older, they obviously don't tend to hold a charge as long. So to compensate for that kind of, you know, quick battery death that comes about, Apple has slowed down the way that older phones perform in order to preserve battery power. Now, of course, that's going to cause some other problems because, you know, your phone's going to take longer to perform any particular process, and that, of course, is going to require more battery time. But, you know, be that as it may, as of today, apparently Apple has publicly apologized for this. They've, you know, kind of confirmed that, yes, we did slow that down, and to make things better, what they're going to do is offer their customers a $29 battery replacement throughout 2018 if you have one of these affected phones. Now, I'm not sure how, you know, I'm not an attorney, and if anyone is, please feel free to speak up. I don't know how that's going to impact these multiple lawsuits that are going on against Apple because of their purposely slowing down this operating system. I don't know if that's kind of a band-aid or, you know, the impression I got was kind of like, you know, whoops, well, you caught us, we did something wrong, but now if you come in, we'll offer you a discounted service, which still means that you go to them and spend some money for them to do something to your phone. So, you know, that's not really an admission of guilt, but it's kind of like saying, yes, we actually did this. And the real big problem with it is that they never told anyone. You know, if there was something about the terms and conditions, and, you know, you obviously have to be an attorney to comb through that stuff to really understand what it says. But the question is this, you know, did customers know that after a certain period of time when their batteries got older, their phone was going to slow down? And I think that's not the case. I don't think most people expected that to happen. Now, was Apple legally obligated to disclose this information? Maybe, maybe not. But, you know, from an ethical standpoint, it seems like if you know, and this is the problem here, is that people often upgrade their phones. So they feel like they need to spend money and invest in a new device because the one they have isn't performing the way that it should. It's not, you know, running as fast as it should or it did originally. And it's one thing to say that you upgraded the operating system and your phone can't handle these new processes, or they can't handle the way that the phone operates. Just like if you have an old computer, you don't install Windows 10 on a computer that's 5 years old. You're going to have some problems with that. But if you have a phone that's only a year or two old and you don't upgrade the operating system, but the battery starts to lose power, and the manufacturer that makes this device purposely throttles it, slows it down, and does not tell you. I think this is the real key point here, is that they didn't disclose this publicly. So we've got all these crazy lawsuits going on. There's one that's like some $1 trillion amount, which that's pretty typical. I think when people file lawsuits, they always ask for way more money than they're entitled to, and then they hope to settle for a smaller amount out of court. And that might indeed be what happens with this. That remains to be seen. There could be a lot of things that happen. I'm going to switch over to the chat here in just a second. But I just wanted to kind of intro this topic. Let's go over this. I'd love to hear anyone's input on it. And then, of course, we'll move on to the other stuff that we have scheduled there. And this first question we have from Nate. How you doing, Nate? Good to see you here. Did you find Ajit Pai cutting your wires last week? And, the answer is no, I don't think that was the problem. And by the way, please, if anything looks funny about this stream, including my audio and video being not properly synchronized, please let me know. I've just had a lot of technical things going on my end, and in fact, I don't think that it had anything to do with my ISP, so I'll lay the blame where it should be. The strangest thing happened to me last week. I was broadcasting, and for some reason, this software had reverted to a different type of encoder on the stream. I have no idea why. So I think I have a pretty good understanding of how this works, and after shutting the software down and turning it back on, it just spontaneously switched to a different type of encoder, and that appears to have been the problem. So I think I've got that all squared away. And the weird thing was I tested the stream before I started broadcasting and everything looked good, and then it wasn't. So I think I got it dialed in, so I'm going to test that every time before I start, and hopefully that will solve the problem. But to be fair, it wasn't Ajit Pai, it wasn't my ISP, it wasn't anything like the conspiracies that I had kind of floating around in the back of my mind. I don't think that they did anything to sabotage me, but something just went funny over here. So what's happened now is that you can go to Apple and for $29 get a battery replacement. And I think that the thing that we're going to hear, that we typically hear, that I would like to pose this question to Apple. If you are in the repair service, every time you open up a customer's phone, there's a good chance they're going to ask you, is my device going to be water resistant after you guys repair it? And we always try to approach that from, being honest, and at the same time educating the customer so they understand what to expect from their device in the first place. Once you crack your screen, your phone is not waterproof. And my question is, if you take your, iPhone 6S or 6S Plus or whatever it is, if you take that to an Apple store and you have your battery replaced, when you get your phone back, is it waterproof anymore? Because I would suspect that is not the case. Now, we do reinstall that little adhesive gasket that goes around the screen and take every step that we possibly can to get it as close to factory specs as possible. But I don't know if Apple has a special display installation machine that's going to put that on perfectly every time or not. Obviously, I would be very curious to see how they remove the batteries, because on the 6S's, that's always, it's always kind of iffy. They usually come out pretty clean, but without alcohol and taking a lot of a lot of extra time to be very careful about it, there's a chance that you mess up that stupid adhesive, and then you have to kind of dig under the battery very carefully and try to grab a hold of another little piece without puncturing the battery cell itself, because obviously we've seen what happens when you do that. So I'm really curious to know how Apple is going to handle this on their end when they start replacing these batteries. And at the same time, what strikes me the most about this is that, if you did something wrong, if you're saying that, we need to do something for these customers because people are going to be upset about it, we're going to get bad publicity, there's going to be lawsuits and so forth, and we probably shouldn't have throttled the operating system without telling the customers. How about this? How about just doing an upgrade so that I can turn that option off so that my phone doesn't run slower at any given time? And, beyond that, does it still run slower while it's plugged into a power supply? I don't know the answer to that question. I don't suspect that it does. But I still feel like we should have the option of deciding for ourselves whether or not we want our phones to run slower. And, if we don't have the option, at least they should tell us up front that that's going to be an issue. I've seen a plethora of symptoms when an Apple battery goes bad. Just today, the screen would change color, then split in half, and the halves would change size. It was weird. You know, it's funny. Someone actually, thanks for confirming on the audio and video, Nate. Someone actually told me something about that, and I haven't seen it myself, but I have been hearing people complain about the image being affected when the battery is replaced on the phone, which, you know, doesn't make sense, but, you know, never say never, obviously. The funniest one I read about a couple days ago was someone had replaced a charge port, and then the customer said that the screen didn't look the same, like the colors had changed. And I know that there are some people that just come up with some really off-the-wall stuff, and my answer to that is yes. If you work in any business where you deal with customers, you're going to come across some people that just come up with some goofy stuff, and you just kind of have to say, sorry, you know, I'd like to help you and do the best you can. And at a certain point, if they're persistent and, you know, have some problems, you really have to just walk away and, you know, tell them, I'm sorry, I can't help you. You know, you need to go somewhere else. But for that to affect the display doesn't make a lot of sense, but I never say never anymore. We've seen some very strange things. Beha, how's it going? Good to see you, man. 100-day hustle. Be also interesting to see what the turnaround time is going to be for the customer. And this is why you know, as soon as I heard about this, my first thought was, you know, and actually I got into a conversation about this on a little chat thing today. And, you know, number one, let's not panic about this. You know, my first thought was, let's stock up on batteries, because the moment the moment we can tell a customer truthfully, yes, your phone is running slower because your battery is old, great. We can give them what they need, which is a battery replacement. That will generate a sale from us. Everyone's happy. And yes, biggest plus for us, of course, is that we can get it done now. You can walk into the store, get your battery swapped out, and you're finished. There's no appointment. There's no line. There's no, oh, it's one of those, you know, we have to deal with the customer because their battery's bad, and really, you know, they're making money on it, obviously, but they're not making a ton of money on it. So the turnaround time, yeah, I would assume it's going to, if you mean from the time that they get to the store, obviously there are a lot of factors involved there depending on where the location is. But I have a feeling they're going to be waiting for a while. And, you know, maybe I'm just being a little paranoid here, but I always get the impression when I go to an Apple store that they're set up in order for you to have plenty of time to browse while they take care of your problems. So, you know, oh, I'm sitting in this, you know, I get to play with your computers if I want to, and there's accessories on the walls, and lets everybody be comfortable and make sure that you wait a sufficient amount of time and have plenty of time to shop for whatever it is that you want. I mean, I don't think that's an accident, but I would assume that if this breaks on a major news outlet, you know, if we really start seeing a lot of media coverage about this battery problem and people start booking appointments at the Apple stores, you could be there for a long time. And so, you know, number one, let's have those batteries on hand. You know, if you haven't already, you know, I'm definitely wanting to be prepared for this. When customers come in, this isn't just an upsell like, hey, you know, your battery light, you know, it's entering the end of its life cycle and, you know, it's not lasting as long. Now it's like your phone doesn't run the way that it's supposed to. So we have a solution to that problem. And as we know, any customer can go to an Apple store to get, you know, a screen replaced, but they still choose to come to us for many reasons. And that's probably going to be the biggest one, I think, is that, you know, the turnaround time and crowded stores and standing in line and making an appointment, and, you know, you feel like you're being herded around like some kind of cattle, and it's not for everyone. There are some people that don't mind that experience. I'm not one of them. I don't go there. So yeah, I think that's going to be a thing. That's going to work in our favor. You know, we can take care of the customer now. We don't have to wait until whenever. Let's see. So as far as the battery thing, I think that's pretty much it. You know, it's going to be really interesting to see how these lawsuits, you know, if they go through. I'm sure Apple's not really sweating it. They're probably going to come out and say, hey, we're giving concessions for this. I really think that what they should have done, and I know that this will add up over time, you know, it could be a large amount of money, but, you know, I think the right thing to do would have been to say, let us just do a software upgrade and give the customer the option of whether they want their phone to be slower or not. You know, that way you don't have to give a discounted battery price. You can say, okay, yeah, oops, we messed up. Now, if you don't want your phone to run slower, you click this option in the app, or you have something in the phone, a setting that you switch, and you go back to, here's how your phone runs with, you know, at 100% speed, and then you get to see how fast your battery dies. I don't think a discounted battery program is really a fair option to the customer. You know, you did something without telling people about it, and now your answer is, well, just get another battery from us, which, you know, they're making some money on this, maybe not a ton, but they're definitely generating some revenue, and they're getting you back in the store. And, you know, unless you don't want to go to their store, then you're going somewhere else to get it. So yeah, I'm not sure. I have a feeling that these pending lawsuits probably have some influence over the way that they have chosen to approach this. So I'll be keeping an eye on this one, and I'll be tweeting updates whenever I can find stuff. And then hopefully, next week we'll come back on here and talk a little bit more about it. But Apple, not a nice thing to do. Not even if it's in the terms. You know how buried that stuff is. It's just ridiculous. Anyways, let's move on a bit. I know I've been on here a long time talking about this battery thing, but it's a big deal. So by the way, I wanted to go over this real quick. I actually ran into someone that I work with quite a while, and he brought this up, and I thought it was an interesting, hopefully helpful thing for any of you who are doing phone repair stuff, and that is the iPhone wiki. So if you're running into restore errors, there is actually, and those error codes are pretty useless if you go to an Apple forum or anything like that. It's like kind of like having an engine light in your car. It's like, okay, it tells us there's something wrong. Well, there's actually a collection of these error codes. And if you don't already know about this, I found it, somewhat helpful. It's not going to solve everyone's problems all the time, but it's the iPhoneWiki.com, and you can actually go in and look up some of the common, a lot of the error codes that show up on iTunes when you're doing a restore, and it can be anything from a charging system issue, which obviously can mean port, USB connection, U2IC, anything like that, but at least it kind of narrows down the problems that you're having with your restores. And because I got into this conversation, it kind of reminded me of something that I meant to bring up. There's just so many different factors that we have involved here. And one of the ones that I noticed that I thought was really interesting is that I have a MacBook and I've got a PC. And for some strange reason, a lot of times when I've come across these restore errors, I've found that when they're software related, occasionally, and I couldn't give you a percentage, maybe 20-25% of the time, but occasionally if I have a software error with the restore, if I try restoring the iPhone or the tab, the iPad or whatever it is on a Mac, it will sometimes work. And I'm not just talking about the error code that you get from jailbroken devices or anything like that, which obviously there's a fix for on Windows, but there's some other restore codes that have to do with software, and for some weird reason, you plug it into an Apple machine and you can restore the phone, whereas with Windows, sometimes you can't. I don't know if that's intentional or not, but I thought I would throw that out there for anyone who's running into restore problems. This is one resource that you can use to kind of narrow down where the problem's coming from. And then always keep in mind that if you have an Apple machine accessible in some way, and I would encourage anyone who has a shop to invest in one, sometimes you can fix those problems just by plugging it into a Mac. So that is one way that we can occasionally get around some of these problems. All right, so what's really discouraging to me, well, not discouraging, but I'm a little bummed about, is that I was really starting to gain some momentum on this live stream, and then last week everything just died, which sucks, because I'm sure that anyone who showed up for the first time is like, oh, this thing doesn't work. So I think I've got that squared away. Hopefully. This will be a test, so we'll know for sure. And next, what do we have? We have, not that, we have this. This is the one that I had really wanted to kind of focus on tonight, and that is the SIM swap fraud. So if you aren't familiar with this, it's been around for a long time. It's probably been at least a year since I heard of the first time that this happened. And I'm trying to remember the guy's name. He goes by Boogie something or other. He's a big YouTuber. He's kind of, he's a gamer. He's like a gaming YouTuber or something. And he's this really big guy. He has an alter ego called Francis. It's the character that he does. It's the big old bowl of gravy guy or something like that. Anyways, this guy apparently got his YouTube account hacked. And this was the method that they used to gain access to his account. And when I watched this video the first time, I was thinking, this is insane. And then I've been hearing more and more about it. And apparently this is still a big thing. And it's something that we should definitely know about. And really anyone who has a phone should understand how this is working. I wanted to say if you use a SIM card, but I think even if your device is tied to a carrier without a SIM card, potentially you could have the same problem happening. So a lot of us use two-factor authentication for our bank accounts and other types of accounts that we use online. And for anyone who doesn't, what that means is that, if I sign into a new device, if I go to my bank account and I want to or my PayPal, I want to log in from a device that I haven't used before, they will send me an authentication code by text message to my phone, so that way I can punch in that little code and say, yes, this is me. I am in fact logging in to my account from another computer or a phone or whatever it happens to be. And then that is their way of confirming that, a little extra layer of security there, so that, someone who has your password, if they're not in possession of the computer or the phone that you log into your account with, it's going to be one extra step that they're going to have to get past. It's like, okay, can you authenticate this? And obviously, if they don't have your phone in their possession, there's no way for them to get that code. Well, actually, there may be. So what's been happening for a while now, and this is, I haven't been affected by it, but apparently a lot of people have, and I read a very long article about that. I'll put a link down in the bottom here when we get finished here if you guys want to check that out to see what the details were. It's really insane. So right before Christmas, as you can imagine, the banks are closed. A lot of carriers have minimal staffing. A lot of phone carriers will outsource their customer service calls to go overseas or, to some call center where people are probably not real excited about working that day. And what these guys are doing is they're contacting, I guess I should back up here a little bit. So how can you log into someone else's account? Well, it's going to be difficult if you don't have their password, right? But in many cases, they have a recovery option for people like me who are not good at remembering passcode, especially if it's an account that you don't log into very often. Well, if I forget my password, I can say, hey, can you send me a password reminder? And a lot of times they will ask you for hints, like what was your pet's name, or, what's your mother's sister's maiden name, or anything along those lines. And in this day and age, and this is one of the things where I really have to kind of reinforce to people that when I talk about privacy, I always get the reaction from people that, well, if you're not doing anything wrong, what are you worried about? I'm not worried about things that I'm doing wrong, or if I were doing anything wrong. It's not that. I'm not doing anything wrong. And that's not the reason that I would be concerned. The reason I would be concerned is because there are people in the world who want your personal information so that they can take advantage of scams like this. And this is the thing that I really want to pass on, especially to anyone, I want to say, of a more mature generation who doesn't really, kind of stay up to date with the way this stuff works. We get phishing scams, we get people sending emails saying, hey, we saw some funny activity on your account. Click this link and go to this page and log in to confirm that you're you and that you're not them and that nobody can get in. And anyone who didn't know better might panic and say, oh, I better log into my account and make sure this is working properly. And in that process, what they're doing is they are providing credentials to the person who's trying to get that information from them. I know a lot of you already know about this, but there's a good possibility that your parents or your grandparents don't, and they are often going to be the ones that fall victim to this type of scam. So in addition to that, we have the popularity of social media, where people are happy to provide things like their birth date and the name of their pet and their maiden name and their, where their parents are from and all this kind of crazy information. And if you remember the big thing about the iCloud being hacked, all these celebrities having their photos and their personal information compromised, this is the way that it worked. They got all this information from their social media. They found out what their favorite snack was, what their favorite restaurant was, what kind of music they listened to. And then, ironically enough, the hints that they used to recover their passwords were all built off of this information that was publicly available for anyone who could, or at least for anyone who could access their profile. So a lot of times people don't put two and two together, but if you have all of these little bits of personal information and you can use that in order to recover someone's password, that's kind of step one. The second step is the authentication for the people who are using this two-factor method where they send a text message to your phone. So even if you have this recovery information, how do you authenticate the device in order to log into someone's account? Well, what you do, long story short, is you find someone working in a customer service center who really doesn't care that much about what they're doing, and it may take multiple calls. And we hear these crazy stories about, accounts that have been flagged. There's all this information all over it that says, do not make any changes here. If anyone tries and, calls up and tries to change this stuff around, don't let them do it. Don't let them switch it. Don't let them update it. And even despite all of these safeguards, remember, there is a human element at play here. So there's someone behind a desk, just like me, who is motivated to, maybe anywhere between 0 and 100% to do their job properly. And if you happen to run into just the right person who really doesn't care, they might have a reason to make you happy, and that might be more of a priority to them than to safeguard your account. So if they can switch the SIM card, if I call up and say, look, it's Christmas Eve, I lost my phone, I got a replacement, but I need my SIM card to work, I have a new SIM card, I need you to activate it for me. And the moment they activate that SIM card, guess where all those authentication messages are going to? They're going straight to my phone now. And until the person who is the real account owner understands or realizes that their phone is not working, they have no idea this whole thing is going on. So apparently this has been a very big problem. And I would assume that a lot of times it probably takes place in the middle of the night. People are asleep, their phone goes out of service, they have no idea. And the next thing you know, funds are being transferred through their bank account. Someone's probably figured out a way to switch it over to somewhere else or to make a withdrawal somewhere, maybe on the other side of the world where it's daylight there and it's nighttime here. And it's really crazy, that this is still a thing, but it is. So you definitely want to make sure that if you get any sort of, this is what really sucks, okay? You want to make sure that if you get some sort of alert, which if you think about it, if you're not on Wi-Fi, and your phone goes out of service, you're not going to get any information. You're not going to get a text. You're not going to get an email. You're not going to be able to receive anything, possibly until it's too late. And when you do, now you've got to decide whether or not this is legitimate or if it is instead some sort of phishing scam. So I know for a lot of us, this is real easy. The first thing that clicks in your head is never click on a link in an email. Go to the website, whatever it is. If it's your bank, if it's... here's the craziest thing about it. The person who wrote this big story about how this scam was, almost pulled on them successfully, was also using a Wells Fargo bank account, which, that kind of added, I think, a little bit to the potential for problems. But if you get an email or a text or anything like that, you've got to decide whether or not it's legitimate. So my first thought is go to the actual banking site or go look up the bank's phone number and contact them directly. Never click through on the link that they send you. Never call the phone number that they send you. And if someone calls you or emails you asking for that information, never, ever provide confirmation for what they're asking you. If they call up and say, hey, we saw some trouble on your account, we need to make sure this is you. What's your name? Or what's your social security number, or the last 4 digits, or anything else like that? Please, don't do that. And here's the craziest thing of all. I think I might have brought this up on a prior live stream, but this is another good one to know. I spoke to someone who had, what's a good way to put this? Who had lived a very colorful life in the past, and pretty much explained to me how they would go to mailboxes. They would go to physical mailboxes, and apparently condos and apartments are the best place to go for people who are looking to break in, because somehow they open the deal up and they get all these people's mail at once. And this person told me that with all the services that are available for you to find background information on other people, you've seen them before, do a background check on this person, employment background, track people down, find out if they have a criminal record, all this kind of stuff. He said, look, if I got a hold of your first and last name and the last 4 digits of your credit card, one of your credit cards, any credit card that you own, last 4 digits, your name and your address, which is all going to be contained on that piece of mail that's in your mailbox every time you get your statement. He said, I can build a complete profile on you and open up all sorts of accounts without you having any idea what's going on, using these paid services where you say, okay, we've got this much information about this person, we need more, and you pay these companies or whoever it is, I don't know if they're private investigators or what, but somehow a lot of this information is public record and they have access to it. And once you get a hold of that and you build an alternate you and you change the address and you have the mail go somewhere else, it can be a long time before anyone understands that it's even happening to them. So that is an extreme example, but this SIM card thing is apparently a big deal. It's still going on. And if you see someone sending you a confirmation text, if you see a two-factor authentication coming to your phone that you didn't ask for, that should be a huge red flag. You should absolutely contact your carrier, as many times as possible and keep an eye on it and make sure that they know that you are not authorizing any sort of changes to your account. And okay, I kind of, I read this and it was just blowing my mind, and I really wanted to get this out there and make sure that people know that it's happening, and hopefully that will help someone. And I would encourage everyone also to pass this information on to other people that you know, because there's a lot of the population that really isn't as tech savvy as you may be. And if you don't tell them about that, that could be a friend or a relative of yours that falls victim to this kind of stuff. And I really hate dishonesty. I mean, that is one thing that just really annoys me. I mean, it's not only the fact that someone is taking advantage of someone else and someone is basically stealing from someone else. I mean, that's bad enough on its own. But on top of that, if people don't follow the rules, the system doesn't work. So there's a real problem with this. It costs money, it costs resources, it can cause damage to people's lives and all sorts of other things. And even if you don't end up losing money on the deal, it's a huge headache. If you know anyone who's ever gone through an identity theft situation, it's such a time investment. It's such a waste of your time and energy that, a lot of times they end up feeling like they're not just being victimized by the person who's taken over their identity, they're also being victimized by the companies that they have to deal with to get this thing straightened out. It's a real mess. Anyways, let me go back here and back up a little bit second here. Nate said, I discovered that if restore fails in recovery mode, it will usually work in DFU mode. Good point. I should have brought that up. Thank you for pointing that out. A lot of times a DFU restore will absolutely work where a normal restore will not. There was one other thing about that I think we can still do shift update, right, instead of shift restore, which at one point was a big issue, because if you actually did a restore, you would cause problems. But you could do shift update, and you could update the software without completing restore entirely, and pretty much preserve the information on the phone, which is often desirable. And I think that generally speaking, doing a restore through iTunes is probably preferable to over the air. I know that there have been some problems associated with that as well, so I would probably do that myself. I am still running 10.3.3. I don't know about the rest of you, but my phone is running smoothly. It's not slow. The battery's not as great as it used to be, but I will probably eventually update to 11.2. There are a couple features that I really want in that. The main thing for me on 11 period is the do not disturb while driving. I think that's a great feature to have. And, sometimes you feel like you want to get back to someone right away and you hear your phone go off, you don't want to pull over. I would love to just have that automated message go to them and say, hey, I'll contact you as soon as I possibly can. How about error 4013 on iPhone 7? Well, if I have the wiki in front of me, anyone else want to offer a solution to that? I will do some Googling and see what this wiki says about that. Off the top of my head, that sounds really familiar. That's a pretty common restore error, isn't it? Let's see if we can go and see what this one says. See if they have any advice. Oh, now I lost the link. Give me a second there, Dino. And let's see if we can figure that out. 4013, isn't that? I know that's a very common one too. What is that called? The iPhone Wiki, theiPhoneWiki.com. I haven't had it on an iPhone 7, but I know I recognize that code. What is 4013? 4013 is iTunes errors 40. Let's see. That says connection to device is lost. Preparing the iPhone before they actually before the phone is actually wiped, causing it to boot normally. Check USBs. Yeah, so that is a connection issue typically. So if you've got 4013 restore error, more than likely you either have an issue with your USB cable, your charge port, or something in the USB system. And I would encourage you to try changing. Well, before you jump into reballing, and I'll acknowledge that sometimes you do need to go to that step, but I would definitely try a different USB. From what you're saying, it sounds like you already did that. But if that's a USB error, I would start with the connection first. Start with a different USB cable, USB port on the computer. And if those two fail, I think I would still try another Lightning port on the phone before you go too far. Is that a NAND? Is that a reballing a NAND or baseband? I'm sorry, you said baseband, right? Okay. Yeah, but definitely rule out the easier things before you go to that point. Have you done one of those, Nate? I have not had to reball a baseband, and I wanted to say that's kind of a risky one, isn't it? If I remember correctly. All right, I will give 40 seconds on that because I keep forgetting that there's lag here. So every time we bring something up, we've got to make sure that we don't move too fast. But I had another one for you, and this is kind of related to it, and that is not that one. That is going to be this one right over here. How can someone impersonate you to fool your provider to send a two-step authentication to swap the SIM card, breached out data? They can do it when they get a hold of someone who doesn't care about doing their job properly. So what's happening, this is my understanding, is that what's happening is they are calling in by phone, and I don't know why it is, but apparently T-Mobile seems to be having a real problem with this. I don't know why. And I do know that historically, T-Mobile has been very, has really set themselves apart as having very good customer service. So I don't know if it's that the employees are trying to, just make the customer happy on the other end of the line and trying to be accommodating. They definitely have procedures in place that say do not allow people, do it this way, follow the rules, make sure you set everything up properly. But apparently this stuff is slipping through the cracks. Like they're getting a hold of the right person on the line, and that person is saying, well, I know I'm not supposed to do this, but I'm going to go ahead and fix it anyways. And that's, it often comes down to the human element. Okay, I want to switch my SIM card. I can't prove to you that I am who I am. Or, potentially they may have your recovery question, and the answers to your recovery questions. As I was talking about earlier, if they went onto your social media and figured out what your favorite food is, what your first pet's name was, what your mother's maiden name was, if they've gathered this information and they call in, then the rep on the line might actually be following all these steps properly and still end up doing the wrong thing by allowing them to change the SIM card on your account, if that makes sense. The phone comes stuck in DFU or rebooting. I watched Chris Long do it live today. I haven't. It is risky. Can also be the TriStar sometimes I hear. I'm really wondering, at this point, and this obviously would require some pretty a little more advanced level diagnostics to rule that out. And this is one of the things that I really believe in as far as what Jessa, the micro soldering lady, has said. And that is, we don't want to go in there and start guessing that maybe if I change out the TriStar, this will fix the problem. Because obviously, if that's not the problem, and we switch it out, and then later on we correct the thing that really is the problem, but we've created another problem by changing the TriStar out, it can become very confusing. The more factors that you have in there, if we just start swapping things out, eventually we might fix the problem, but then we created another one. So I always hesitate to just say, it might be this. I'd really want to know what would lead me to believe that it would be the TriStar. And I've had a few devices like that recently where I feel like, it could be the TriStar. But if I swap the TriStar out, it's not a big deal on a lot of devices. But if you start working with something that has underfill built into it and you start pulling the TriStar out, there's a potential that you would cause some damage to an adjacent component. And then you kind of complicate things a little. But I think the main thing was that on reballing the baseband, if you damage the baseband chip, you're pretty much done. I mean, that's a wrap on the phone. So I would really want to leave that as my last resort to try that. And obviously, Chris Long has had a lot of practice doing what he's doing, and I'm sure that even he will acknowledge that there is a risk to pretty much bricking the phone if you take it to that level. It wouldn't be my first choice, but if you rule everything else out and you feel like you have nothing left to lose, then I guess that's the next step, right? This is the other thing that I thought was interesting, and that is they have done a study. A study has been done to show that hackers can guess what the PIN code is on your phone by using some of the sensors that are built into it. So we have an accelerometer, we have a proximity sensor, we have a number of different things that are built into our phones, and apparently these guys have, within 99%, been able to figure out what a phone's password or passcode is, or any other PIN code that's built in on it, by using the information that is gathered by these sensors. So why is this, who cares, right? Well, my first thought is that, as we kind of talked about, applications having access to your facial recognition. So we have to trust that any app that comes through iTunes or through the App Store has been vetted, and that Apple's okay with it, and that there's some reason that we trust the developers who designed this application that works with facial recognition. Okay, but obviously there are a lot of people out there who are building these apps, and now not only are even if you're not using facial recognition for the app, now if you're granting that application access to these other sensors that are built into your phone, the wrong person having that information can use those sensors to determine, just by the way your phone moves, by the way that shadows are cast, by the way that the rhythm that they're input, what code you're punching into your phone. So for whatever that's worth, I think it's really interesting, whether you're concerned about it or not. It's very interesting to consider that as we move into an age where more and more information is being gathered and compiled and collected, and as people are less and less concerned really about, whether or not they should trust someone who built a piece of software that they install on their phone or their computer or their tablet or anywhere else, just the fact that these guys came out and proved that, if we really wanted to, if we were the wrong people, we can use all this stuff that you probably never even thought about being a factor. I mean, obviously you could build some sort of keylogger, right? But I think that they would have a very hard time getting that through the App Store. Maybe if you were jailbroken, you'd be a little more susceptible to that kind of problem. But with this, you could have something simple like a game where, you have to use the accelerometer, you have to use the proximity sensor, you have to use all these other things that are built into your phone in order to play this game or to, recognize some music or whatever it is that they're doing. And if you gather all that information together, you can now collect the keystrokes that are going into that touchscreen, and these guys have done it apparently with about 99% accuracy. Now, they did state that one of the things that worked in their favor, or one of the components or variables of this test, was that most people use one of the 50 most common passwords that exist. So when it comes to PIN codes on ATMs, phones, anything else, there's this whole list of passcodes. It's like 1234 0000 2017 2018, those kind of things. There are 50 that are very popular, and to this day most people really don't, a lot of people don't take steps to change those because they're easy to remember, and they're not really concerned about someone getting a hold of their phone and getting into it. But now there's a potential that an application that is built into your phone can be collecting that information, even though there's no sort of keylogger built into it. So I just thought at the very least it's something that we should acknowledge, be aware of. More important, I think, is the SIM card swap scam. If you have customers that you think might be vulnerable to this, or people that we should definitely spread this information, make sure that people are aware of it, and be careful out there. When the money is gone from your account, it's very difficult to get it back. And for that reason, I know this is really funny. I've done this for a long time, and then I heard someone confirm that this is a great idea. If you're ever going to make a purchase that you are concerned might be a problem in the future, don't use your ATM card, don't use a debit card, use a credit card, because at least in that case, you kind of have a buffer. You've got the credit card company who you can contact and say this is unauthorized, and in that time period while they're figuring things out, it's not your money that's tied up. When you use your ATM card or debit card or whatever you want to call it, that money comes out of your account immediately. And even if you have some legal recourse and you can go back and get those charges reversed and recover those funds, they're not available in the meantime. Whereas with the credit card, they put a freeze on the account, they figure things out, and it's their money that's being disputed and not yours. And for that reason, I encourage everyone to do the same thing. If you're not sure about something but you want to do it and it's kind of iffy, use your credit card before you use your debit card for sure. Comments. Okay. Nate, you're right about doing full diagnosis before repairing chips. It's a great last step because it's dead anyway at that point. Yeah, and that's how I approach a lot of these phones. It's kind of like, have we tried everything we can to rule out the easy stuff that won't kill the phone? And, I've been lucky so far, but, I've seen, and I use a heat sink, and it's just when you get anything too hot that's, processor, baseband, NAND, any of that kind of stuff, and it quits working, that's a sad day. It really sucks. But yeah, when you got nothing left to lose, yeah. Puck codes are helpful, is my understanding. Now, I'm not sure how that would work, Johnny. If you have a puck code that's built into the SIM, that is in order to operate the SIM card on the phone. If you change SIM cards, if your carrier changes that, if that puck code goes along with the, with the new SIM that's issued out, I would say yes. I would have to know the details based on the way your carrier works. So if that puck code is going to be part of the new SIM card, absolutely. That seems like it would be a good option. Also, there's some one-time password stuff out there that they're talking about being, potentially a solution to this, but there are not, not every phone is going to support that. And even my understanding is even within the Android system, you have to have root access in order to use a lot of the software that utilizes the one-time password authentication, whether it's time-based or otherwise. So I think that puck codes, it would be worth looking into how your carrier approaches that. Harvey, how you doing, man? I didn't even know you were here. Great, thanks for listing all my PIN codes. Sorry, man. Hey, you should not have these common PIN codes. It's bad. It's a bad idea. It's the first thing that people will try, or at least have a limitation on your phone so that after 5 attempts or whatever, it does that thing where you have to wait forever. And then if you're here's my favorite one, is when we have a customer who knows what their PIN code is, but their screen hasn't been working properly. Like the touch is off, so they start punching in the code that they know is right, but it's not hitting the right area on the screen, and then they disable the phone that way and say, hey, can you fix this? And with rare exceptions, it's not going to be an option without resetting the phone, which really sucks. People get mad at Apple for not allowing the home button to be replaced, but can you replace the home button on newer Samsungs and other phones? In most cases, yes. I don't know of any Samsung phone, and someone correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know of any Samsung phone that stores that has a secure enclave built into the home button like Apple does. And yeah, people get mad at Apple. I don't know that that's a good design. It seems like their concern at the time was that someone could take a replacement home button for an iPhone and somehow hack the button, and then see, this doesn't make sense to me because they're saying they didn't want to have it built into the phone, but to me it seems like it would be easier to fool the button itself than the entire phone. But I think the two having to communicate is their response to why that works, and I don't know why Samsung doesn't. Most other phones that I know of, you can replace the home button, so I think that Apple is alone in doing that fingerprint authentication on the iPhones and on their other devices for that matter. And by the way, for anyone who just joined, and for everyone out there, I want to say happy holidays. Last week I was attempting to do that and things weren't cooperating with me, so thanks for all of you who continue to come on here. This is the only reason I do this. Well, that and I enjoy talking tech, but I definitely do this because you guys show up and participate in the conversation. So awesome. And here's to you. It is Cheap Wine Thursday night. Actually, I'm not drinking cheap wine tonight. I'm actually drinking mid-grade wine. So for anyone else, feel free to join me in your favorite beverage. I am going to have a sip because I've been good for the last 40 minutes. A friend of mine has a son who can unlock the phone with the face recognition. Can you do something about it? My understanding is at this time, no. If you're talking about the iPhone, like the iPhone 10 face recognition, I do not believe that there is a solution to that at this point. There was a lady who had a neighbor who she was not, at least to her knowledge, was not related to, was not a blood relative at all. And her neighbor was able to unlock her phone. And she went to Apple, got the phone swapped out, went home, tried it again, and the same thing happened. And this has been a problem with identical twins, parents and children, and yeah, to my knowledge, I don't think that there's anything that you can do about it at this point. I mean, you would have to dramatically change your appearance, which, how would you do that? So yeah, that's pretty crazy. I would love to see a video. I really wish I knew someone like that so we could just make a video of it because it would be entertaining. But as far as a solution, I don't have one for you. Now, he could go back to a passcode. I think that's the only thing. I don't think that you can use the Face ID to unlock the phone when it works with someone else, effectively. That's always there's going to be a potential for them to get into your phone. So I would say switch to a passcode for now. Maybe there will be a software update in the future, but I'm not aware of any right now. I've never had an issue changing any Samsung or other Android buttons. The fingerprint has always worked for me, and that's been my experience also. I don't think that there's any other phone other than Apple, any other device other than Apple devices that have that fingerprint authentication built into the home button itself. And I gotta say, I try to be fair. I know a lot of companies do things for reasons, but this is one of the things that I really felt was a bad decision by Apple. Not necessarily just putting the fingerprint scanner into, putting the Touch ID into the home button, but the whole Error 53 fiasco where if that fingerprint scanner was damaged, if that flex cable for the Touch ID was damaged, the phone could continue to work until you performed an update or restored it, and then it just went blue screen. To me, I think that was a very bad design. It left a lot of people, if you wanted to say, okay, if your fingerprint scanner is damaged, you can't use your phone immediately. Okay, to me that doesn't make sense, but at least that would say we have a problem. But we had a lot of people who had their phones repaired, replaced the Touch ID button, knew the Touch ID didn't work, but they still had a home button functionality until they upgraded. And all of a sudden your phone just quits. Like in the middle of nowhere, you do an upgrade and your phone doesn't work and there's no Apple Store around. There's no way to get it going again. I think that was a bad decision on their part. And, I would believe that they came to the same conclusion because they fixed that. They patched it so that you could, in fact, continue to use your phone. So they kind of switched their position on that one. But, to disable any device entirely because one feature or one component stops working, when it's something that's not really, a necessity. You could use assistive touch or some other way to, you can still swipe the screen. You don't have to have that Touch ID function in order for the phone to work. To me, it was a bad idea to disable everything because of that. But, at the time they said that was all for your protection. So for whatever it's worth, they fixed that problem or that issue, I should say. Will you be able to replace Face ID sensors? I do not believe so. My understanding is no. The Face ID sensor has got to be transferred over to the new screen. So at least to my knowledge, if that becomes damaged, you are out of luck as far as Face ID functionality goes. Now, can you still use the phone? I don't know the answer to that one. I think that the phone still functions, but you definitely will not be able to replace that Face ID sensor. I have not had anyone come in and replace their iPhone 10 screen yet. So I'm going based on information that other people provide. And this is usually, at least for us, this is what we see for the first couple of months after Apple releases a new phone. It's like it doesn't make a lot of sense for people to spend the amount of money that we have to pay to get the replacement part. And those will come down quickly. I actually saw a video where where a company replaced the glass on an iPhone 10, successfully put it all back together. So good news to everyone out there. We should have some aftermarket or basically some refurbished AMOLEDs for iPhone 10s available in the near future. That is definitely doable. Cheers, Johnny Chang. Cheers to everyone. Draw moles on your face. There you go. That might work. But you'd have to do that like constantly, right? Does homebrew ROMs possess more vulnerabilities to hack because they stick to the guidelines of open source software? Anyone feel free to jump in and answer that. I do not have an answer for you on that one. Does homebrew ROMs possess more vulnerabilities to hack because they stick to the guidelines of open source software? My guess would be yes, but I'm probably not the right person to ask about that. So if anyone knows that topic well enough to respond, please do. I don't know that one. Can you buy iPhone 10 screens online? I'm sure that you can. I haven't had to yet, but last time I priced them, they were pretty outrageous. I'm sure that you can. But you're going to be spending a lot of money. I think the Face ID sensor is built into the housing, doesn't get moved during a screen replacement. Well, if I understand this correctly, part of the Face ID system is built into the housing, but the sensors themselves that face the front of the screen have got to be transferred over from the old screen to the new screen. So I'm probably phrasing this incorrectly. The Face ID cameras, so you're right. The Face ID sensor, I believe, is built into the phone, so that shouldn't be affected by the screen replacement, but the Face ID cameras have to be transferred, and my understanding is that you cannot replace those either. Somebody prove me wrong, I hope, because Face ID seems to be seems like this is Apple's plan to stick with in the future. So I think we'll be seeing a lot of that. And I know it's a fun gimmick, and there are some reasons why probably people like it. And I don't think I got to cover this last week because everything got cut off earlier than planned, but there's actually a company out there, not a very big company, but there's a company out there who has done what we always thought Apple was going to do, and that is to build a Touch ID sensor into the display itself so that anywhere that you put your finger on the screen on the phone, it will recognize and allow you to unlock the phone, and it works much faster and obviously can be more convenient than facial recognition, which to me is not something that, obviously is not going to be very discreet. If you have to stick your phone up in front of your face to unlock it, I do see how the popularity is going to be in part due to the applications that utilize Face ID. I think, for me at least, that would be the main reason why having the Face ID feature would be a plus, is so that you can, send people animated emojis and, use applications that utilize Face ID. I don't personally use it, and I'm not going to criticize anyone who does. To me, it's kind of weird. I don't feel like I need my fingerprint or a picture, a very high definition, not high definition, but a very good impression of my face into a phone and into any application that chooses that I've allowed to have access to that. I don't think I need that to be stored by anyone, but for those who do, that's cool. I still don't think that it's really all about unlocking the phone, though. I think it's more about the features that you get by being able to have that facial recognition built into the phone. And as far as unlocking the phone goes, they have got to the, fortunately it's not Apple, because this is kind of the thing that we're all concerned about. If they build the Touch ID into the screen, we're kind of in trouble, because we can't replace a screen where a customer will still be able to unlock it, because only Apple will be able to match the screen up to the phone. So they didn't do that, but someone else did. So I'm really curious to see how well this does. It's a company outside of the US, so I don't think we're going to see too much of it here yet. But if that catches on, that could be a concern, because if Apple does eventually, or any other company, major manufacturer, ends up moving the Touch ID into the screen instead of into a home button or anything of the like, then it's going to be really difficult for us when we're dealing with broken screens. John Cassidy said, "Have you fixed the back glass on an iPhone 8 yet?" I have not, but I know someone who did. And long story short, he was successful. I am waiting for him to edit the video, and hopefully if he doesn't give me a copy to publish, I will at least give you a link to his channel so that you can see it. He said it took a very long time, and it is probably not going to be a reliable method. So in his opinion, yes, you can get the glass off of an iPhone 8 in one piece, but probably not 100% of the time, and also be prepared to invest a long time in order to do it. Now, if it's already broken, obviously we're not too worried about the original piece, but this was his goal, was to take it off at one, I guess take it all off without doing any damage to it. I haven't done it yet, but it has been done, so it's possible. Probably not a lot of fun. How do you save the wireless charger? That is a good question. I'm going to see, hey, Real World, are you on here? Because if you are, you can answer this. I do not have the answer, and hopefully he's here. Let me check the participants. He could be away from the computer. Let me see if he's on here tonight. If he's not, no, it doesn't look like he's on tonight, at least not logged in. So I don't have an answer for you right now, but that is a good question, and I will put something down in the video description as soon as I get an answer from him. I haven't done it personally, but it has definitely been done, and my understanding is there was no damage to anything. So the back panel was taken off in one piece, didn't affect the wireless charging, didn't mess up the paint or anything like that, and the phone is still fully functional. So can be done. I want to say that he spent a good hour and a half getting it off, though, without causing any damage, just for the record. But that would be, obviously, that's a concern. Hey, they have a new wireless charger that has just been approved by the FCC or someone like that has a 3-foot charging distance. So there is a device out there now that you can charge from 3 feet away from the charging base, which I think is really cool, and at the same time a little concerning, right? Because if something can send a signal powerful enough to charge a phone wirelessly from 3 feet away, you have to wonder, like, what else, where else is that signal going? What happens if you're sitting right next to it? But apparently that's the thing now. I should have got some slides for that too. That was a really interesting one. How nervous do you get when you're working on an expensive device? That is a great question. So, this is part of doing business, obviously, and this is part of the hidden cost that a lot of people I want to say that anyone who's new to phone repair, it's a great question, Harvey, because this is something that I always go over in my training. We have And you'll see them come and go. You'll see people who pop up and open a store, or they meet people at Starbucks or a buy appointment, whatever, and they do repairs for a while, and then suddenly they vanish. And I always suspect that maybe it has something to do with a situation like this. If I have a $1,000 phone, and this is the way I present it to everyone, and Beha can vouch for me here. I tell people, when you have a $1,000 phone in your possession, the second worst thing that can possibly go wrong is that you have to replace that $1,000 device. I say that's the second worst thing, because really the worst thing is that any of the information that's on that device that hasn't been backed up, and even if people tell you that they backed it up and it's on the cloud and everything else, I can almost guarantee you, if the operating system becomes corrupted, or you have to restore the phone, or you brick it, they're going to say, I have invaluable information stored on that device. I can never get it back. $1,000 isn't going to make me happy. You guys ruined my life. So to me, that's really the most painful part. That's the worst part of it. But the second thing is, if you have a $1,000 device in your hand and it gets stolen, or you destroy it, the worst case scenario is you're out $1,000, right? Because you've had to replace that device. Now maybe you can salvage some parts, and maybe you can recoup some of that loss. But you've got to explain to the customer what happened. They have to go through the waiting period to get it back, or whatever the dollar amount it is. It doesn't have to be $1,000. And I will answer your question. Do I get nervous? I don't know if I'd call it nervous, but I certainly, my alertness level goes up, and maybe my blood pressure rises a little bit. I would not want to approach anything as being nervous. If I felt nervous about doing something, I would rather not do it. So if you go into something that can be damaged easily and you're feeling nervous, it's probably not a good idea for you to do that. But that being said, I always tell people to imagine the worst possible scenario and be prepared for that. This is the part of doing business, and this is one of the reasons why, if you have a replacement part that costs you $50 and it takes you an hour to install, and you're charging I'm just pulling some figures out of the air. If it costs you $50 for the part, $25 labor is what you're charging to install it, and it takes an hour of your time, you are not going to make money. You are not going to succeed long term for a lot of reasons. There's the obvious, which is the overhead. But the other factor that's really built in here that a lot of people don't think about is the liability. And the main liability there is going to be the cost of that device, because you're not talking about a $50 liability, which is the screen itself. You're talking about the replacement value of the device if you make a really serious mistake and cause a problem there. So I wouldn't say that I'm ever nervous, but I would say that that is an excellent question, and something that people should really think long and hard about when they, if they're not particularly experienced in repair, and they think that, I can beat the guy down the street's price by just doing this cheaper. Well, the guy down the street, if he's been in business for any period of time, he understands this whole equation. He understands how this works, and a lot of times customers have a hard time with it because they're not on our side of the bench. They don't see what goes into setting this place up and having the parts on hand, and sometimes we don't sell through all of our parts and they depreciate. But more importantly, once in a while, a store gets broken into and all the devices disappear, and there's an insurance deductible to pay, or maybe someone, something vanishes, weird things happen. So when it comes to working on phones, I don't typically feel nervous, and I think the main reason is that I rarely, if ever, start a project that I don't feel like I have a good understanding of. And this is another thing that I kind of preach to people, is that you shouldn't feel like you have to be a pioneer. There are other people out there who have done this teardown for the first time, and unless you want to be the guy that beats whoever else it is who's, hey, it's the first one ever, first teardown ever, which, this is another thing that really gets me, is when I see video tutorials, it's one thing to be first. If that's your goal, to be the first one to get a video tutorial about how to do a repair out, I totally understand that. The way that YouTube works, it kind of helps your ranking, it helps you get more exposure, getting to suggested videos. But do you really think that the first time someone does a repair video, as soon as the device comes out, that it's really going to address a lot of the problems that people will encounter when they try to follow that tutorial and do the same repair? And, the obvious answer is no. If you did a phone one time, you can't possibly imagine the potential issues that might come up the next time you do it. Not to mention when, someone out there who hasn't worked on that phone before tries to watch your first time repair video and say, oh, well, this guy did it, I can do the same thing. Well, man, there's so many different things that can go wrong. So for that reason, generally speaking, one of two things will happen when we come across a repair, and I think most of the people on here that do repairs will agree with this. Either A, you have a good understanding of how that manufacturer typically puts things together. So, if you've done one Galaxy this year, you probably have a good idea of what most Galaxy phones look like on the inside. If you did an iPhone 6s, you probably have a pretty good idea of what to expect from an iPhone 6s Plus and so forth. But if someone just released a phone yesterday and it's a less common manufacturer that we don't see very often, if it's an HTC or if it's an LG, or I shouldn't say LG because LGs are pretty straightforward, but if it's some other manufacturer that we haven't seen before, we really want to get a good look of a teardown, a repair video, an iFixit guide, and then take all that information that we have and obviously exercise caution when we do the device for the first time. Now, it would be preferable, of course, to have a device on hand just to play with and take apart and, experiment with, but that's often not going to be the case. Sometimes these things come out and people have to get them fixed in a rush, but I am not here to blaze the trail. I want to take all the information that I get from other people and use that to protect my customers' devices when I'm working on them. I hope that wasn't too much of an answer, but that's kind of the attitude that I take towards it. But thank you. That is an excellent question. It's possible to commit a Tempest kind of attack as it is with the old CRT monitors with the LCD screens of handhelds. A Tempest kind of attack? Man, I got to tell you guys, you're kind of talking over my head here. I don't know what a Tempest attack is with CRT monitors. So what happened to the tech startup who promised mechanical ultrasound transfer of energy for charging devices through a distance from one room to another? I don't know. And that's the other thing is, I get a lot of these Kickstarter and GoFundMe things saying, hey, we'll send you this device, you can try it out and promote it. And that's one thing. If you have it and it works, I'm happy to test it out. But then we see a lot of things where people claim that this device is going to do this thing. And from what I've been told, there are some of these where you can invest in something and it may never come to be. It may never come to market. Remember the one where they had a display? It was like a holographic display that's on your arm that you push the buttons with. And it was complete fantasy. Like it didn't even exist. So yeah, there are a lot of these startups that say they're going to do something and no, they are not able to do them. Have you fixed an iPhone 8 screen yet? Personally, no. But I do have at least one tech who has, and not a big deal, LCD. I don't think there's really any major issues to worry about on the iPhone 8 screens, if that's what you're getting at. Let's see. Does electronic technicians have to have qualifications as a professional plumber or electrician have to perform their trade? No. At least not where I'm at. In California, you do have to, you should have a business license. Obviously, there are a lot of people kind of doing it on the side, doing it off the record. But in California, if you want to have a legitimate business, you want to have a business license, and you also have to have a certificate from the Bureau of Electronics and Appliance Repair, which basically means you just have to spend $150. There are no criteria. So to my knowledge, at this point in time, other than paying for the correct permits, you don't have to have any amount of training. You just have to be able to do what you do. So it's not like, even if you cut someone's hair, if you're going to be a cosmetologist, you have to go to school and you have to get a certificate. And you have to be trained and tested and show people that you can do what you say you can do. And with phone repair, at least as of now, no, you just have to spend money to buy the correct licensing and certificate in order to do it. There's not a formal training program. There are certainly programs that you can benefit from going through beforehand, but we don't, it's such a relatively new type of business that we really don't have a lot in the way of requirements, at least at this point in time. When do you think the right to repair lawsuit will concur? Will it be in our favor or the other way around? Thanks for bringing that up, Robert. Sad to say, I have not heard, and this is another thing I started to talk about last week, I have not heard a lot about the right to repair. So what has been happening is that one state at a time will kind of have this movement where they go and they start to do some sort of legislation at the state level. And I'm not sure that is really the correct approach. I really think that this has to be a federal movement. And the real question probably is, where will the funding come from? The short answer to your question, when do I think the right to repair lawsuit will concur? Well, it's going to be, it's multiple moves towards legislation, so it's not really one single thing that's happening. They're trying to do it at different places throughout the U.S., off and on, but it's been quite a few months, several months since I've heard anything new about it. I'm not sure that it will. I certainly hope that it does, and, it's much bigger than electronics repair. This has to do with farming equipment and medical equipment and things that could affect, when you think about it, it could affect something way beyond the cost of repairing a phone. This could have to do with how much food ends up costing people, because people in agriculture who provide, produce and provide the food that feeds this nation are being affected by software that's built into farm equipment that prevents them from getting their stuff repaired themselves, because of this proprietary software that's built into it. People within the medical industry have these huge $50,000, $100,000 machines or more that they can't service themselves, and they can't have someone else fix, and they're really at the mercy of the manufacturer to have these things fixed. And I believe that if anything, really spearheads and makes something happen here, I don't really think that it's going to be the electronics repair industry. I hope that we benefit from that, but I don't think it's going to be easy enough to bring an argument to the people who make these sorts of decisions, who grew up without cell phones. Okay, this is a thing that we have to keep in mind. A lot of people who are in charge of government entities and lobbying and Congress people, a lot of these people are a bit older than us, and they didn't grow up feeling like they needed to have a phone in their hand or that they needed their tablet in order to perform their job. So I think it's going to be a very tough sell for a lot of the people who will be involved in, approving this process. But the good news is we have the farming industry and the medical industry, as part of this argument. They are also affected by this. And this is something that's a lot more realistic, I think, to anyone, to everyone in Congress and everywhere else. And that is that, farmers need to be able to get their equipment fixed in order to go to harvest tomorrow, not when it's convenient for the manufacturer to come out and service their stuff. And beyond that, obviously, we have the whole argument that, you sell someone something and then they can't do what they want with it and they have to go back to you. That's one side of it. But we really need to have an argument that says this is bad for the population. It's bad for you. It's bad for me. And it goes beyond just being able to choose what phone you want to buy and, whether or not you can fix your phone. So if anything happens, I think that will be the reason why. As far as what the outcome is going to be, man, that is a tough call, I want to be optimistic and say that, maybe they'll just lay down a law across the board that says, hey, if you have software built into your devices, you have to give people access to the information they need to repair it. I don't know if that's a realistic expectation. I certainly hope that's the way it goes. But I think that really it's going to rely a lot on the farming and the medical industry to really argue this for us. I think it's nice that people are showing up. If this comes to California, I will go to Sacramento. I will go to wherever it is within my state and volunteer. If they will hear what I have to say, I would love to, put this into terms that everyone understands, not just us. People, I would want to put together an argument, a short statement that someone who doesn't even own a phone would understand why this is the best thing, why we should be able to have access to this. And I'll go there. I'll spend money out of my pocket to get there, but I don't know if my argument and arguments from people within the repair industry are enough. I really doubt it. I think we need something bigger. And these are the two big factors that I see. That's farming and agriculture. You got to eat and you have to have medical care. Well, at this point, that appears to be questionable for some people. But I think that, in this day and age, it's realistic to say that in this country, we need to have access to food and medicine. And if you don't think so, then we're going to have some big problems down the line. So we'll see. I'm on top of it. I'm watching their website. I'm watching the news. And you just don't hear a lot about it, unfortunately. That's the bad side, the downside there. Does your Chinese screen supplier offer full assembly iPhone screens? And if so, do you use them? We can get the pre-assembled screens, and what I typically do is not to buy the screens with all the components installed, like the earpiece and all that kind of stuff, and I will go beyond that and offer you my reason why. Now, I do like it when they have the proximity sensor guide built into the screen, the little plastic piece that goes inside. However, with some manufacturers, they end up gluing that thing into the wrong position. So even with that, I'm willing to transfer that stuff over. And obviously, if you have an older device that has Touch ID built into it, that's got to be transferred anyways. But I found that when it comes to small parts, whether it's on phone screens or if you're buying replacement housings, they don't typically do a really good job with the smaller internal parts. So I prefer to do those for myself. You can pay a little bit more and get those, but I would propose that a better alternative might be to take a damaged screen, and when you do, buy an extra screen, have an extra complete screen on hand, and just pre-prep your own screens. Put all the components inside, test them out, make sure they're working, and have those ready to go. So when the customer comes in, you can have them in and out in 10 or 15 minutes, which opens up a whole other can of worms. We have this thing where our saying in the business is everybody wants to win. Okay. So keep this in mind when a customer comes to you, and I think this is true in any industry, no matter where you're at. When a customer comes to you, any way that they can find to say that I think this should cost less money than it does would be in their interest, right? So if you can get a repair done faster because you have pre-assembled screens ready to go, then a lot of times people will question whether or not you're justified in charging the amount of labor that you do. Because, hey, it only took you 10 minutes, right? Well, they don't see the behind-the-scenes work where you put the whole thing back together before they were even there during your downtime, if there is such a thing. And on the other hand, people's phones can never get done fast enough. So it's like, which one do you want? Well, it's going to take 25 minutes. Oh, I don't have that much time. Oh, well, I can, give you an express service and have it done in 10. Well, then why did you charge me so much labor? So it's hard to win on that one. But I would prefer to pre-assemble my screens, if anything, and not rely on the manufacturers to install the small parts, because it seems like they're not always 100%. And really, I think you pay a lot more for that than it's worth, at least in my opinion. So, by the way, our supplier typically comes to us. So when you say Chinese supplier, if we order things, and we can order from, all sorts of different suppliers in China, and a lot of them do have that option, but we prefer to buy from a local refurbisher. So we have a guy that comes to the store, he picks up our old parts, takes them to wherever, they refurbish the screens, and they resell those. So that way, we just get OEM stuff back. And they don't typically install any of the internal components. Now with the aftermarket stuff, they have those on hand, and those don't, at least from the person that we buy them from right now, they don't have that stuff installed. But you can definitely get them, but I don't know that it's justified to pay the difference in cost. Let's see, where were we? Nate, I'm 100% YouTube trained in my micro soldering skills. I'm pretty good now after almost 2 years. Did you happen to make a comment on another forum to that effect? And the reason I'm asking is because I saw someone who was saying, should I get micro soldering training? Or, is that required? And someone kind of commented, well, I'm self-trained off of YouTube and I'm doing okay for a while. So chances are that wasn't you, but that's quite the coincidence. And yeah, I think that my understanding, with exception of the diagnostic processes for micro soldering, the best way to learn is to practice. It certainly wouldn't hurt to have someone coach you on the fine points. But in my experience, when it comes to micro soldering, it's all about experience, practice, and having some decent equipment and knowing and understanding how your equipment works. And don't expect to go to any 1 week long micro soldering course and be a master of micro soldering. I mean, there's definitely going to be weeks of follow-up where you work with different logic boards, different components, things like underfill, knowing what to watch out for. There's certainly an ongoing thing, but there's definitely a learning curve and a practice interval that you want to get used to. At least that's been my experience. And for the record, Nate, I had some really basic training for micro soldering, but I've got a lot of what, the techniques that I use from watching YouTube, from watching people who are really good at it, like Jessa and Chris Long and Lewis Rossman, and, a lot of people who have been doing this much longer than I have. And that's definitely helped me. Let's see. Thank you for your helpful insight to my queries, and enjoy your cup of wine. Happy holidays. Thanks, Johnny Chang. Will there be a time when we can custom assemble a handheld as we do with PCs, as the guy from Strange Parts did to build his iPhone 6 from refurbished parts? Maybe, probably. I mean, you probably could do it. I'm sure that there will be. The question probably is going to be, do you want to invest the time and energy, and is it really going to be worthwhile, outside of the accomplishment, to be able to say that, hey, I built this, I put this together myself. I certainly encourage people to build what we call Frankenstein phones. If you have 6 phones that are broken, as long as one has a good logic board, you can take the working parts from the other phones, put those together, and we used to do that all the time. Kind of make this one with the smash this part, work with this thing, and the main thing is if you've got a good working logic board, 100% functionality, or you can get it to that state, you can get the parts off of other phones and put those things together and make them work. As far as refurbished parts, yeah, I mean, refurbished or not, shouldn't make a difference. I hope I'm approaching that question properly. Why do you choose the aftermarket when you can get one level up for $3? John, what are you talking about? The reason I'm asking is that if we get something like an iPhone LCD, we can get the OEM LCDs for something like an iPhone 7 in the neighborhood of, I want to say, about 70, 80 bucks. And we can get an aftermarket for 20. So obviously, if it was a $3 difference, I would say get the OEM. If it's that small of a percentage of what the total of the part is. But in many cases, we're paying double or triple what the aftermarket is, and that all comes down to what the customer is willing to pay for the repair. And that's probably the exception. The main thing is when it comes to displays, when we're working with iPhones, we have some very inexpensive options that some people can live with. And then obviously when they want the high quality OEM stuff, they're going to pay more. But for anything else like that, I wouldn't typically choose aftermarket on something like, I'm trying to think of what, if you can kind of clarify on what you're talking about with aftermarket, I can probably answer that a little better. How steady are your hands, Mike? Well, I am not I don't have the steadiest hands in the world. I'd say they're decent, but I certainly rely on some tips and tricks that I learned to keep them more steady under the microscope. And, just to give you the short answer to that, one is don't drink a lot of caffeine on any day that you plan on micro soldering if it makes you jittery. And the second thing is, I wish I could really kind of show you a picture of this, but I have found that rather than trying to hold my hands in midair, which in some cases would work, if I can prop them up on something, like if I stack a book or anything near the area that I'm working on, and I can kind of rest my hand on top of something, it will stay a lot steadier than me just trying to hold it in midair. My hands are relatively steady, but they're certainly not the steadiest in the business. That helps, but there are ways to deal with that if it's a problem. If you have really shaky hands, to the point where your fingers are even shaky, that's going to be a tough one. But there are some ways you can kind of overcome problems like having shaky hands. Hopefully that answers. Like standard grade screens, not OEM or aftermarket in the middle. There are probably 5 or 6 different levels, but if I found a screen that was much better for $3 more, I would definitely buy that. But I'm actually using my phone right now as a camera. We found that the Tianma screens, for the price, are pretty decent, and that's what we're using. And there probably are some that are like $3 cheaper, but what we look for is what's realistic as far as quality goes, that will be acceptable for the customer if they choose for the lowest. If they have a preference for the lower price, if they say, there's no way I'm paying over $100 to replace my screen. I saw a guy that's doing it for $65. We say, okay, well, here's what you get for $65. And I'm glad you brought that up, because as I've been using this aftermarket screen that I installed on my phone, I realized something else that I really wasn't aware of. So we have the obvious variation in colors on the LCDs. If you get an aftermarket LCD like Tianma or Hankai, or there's actually a third one now that manufactures third-party aftermarket LCDs. That's redundant, right? They manufacture LCDs for iPhones. One thing is the color variations and the brightness of the screen, but another thing is that I noticed if I'm holding and I wanted to show you guys this, so just real quick. You won't believe what I found in the back of the shop just very recently. This right here is a first generation iPhone, and it is, I don't know if the camera will pick this up, it has a whopping 4 gigabytes of storage. Can you see that? Quit focusing on my face here. I have a 4 gig iPhone, what I used to call a 2G, but I was corrected. It's not technically a 2G. And this thing still powers up. But it does need to be restored. It's going to connect to iTunes, so I'm going to make a separate video on that and see if I can get this bad boy running. So one thing that I have noticed, though, on the aftermarket screens is not just the display quality, but if I'm using, look at how small this thing is. If I'm reading something online, and this is one reason that I stay away from social media most of the time. If I'm reading something online, my fingers just touching the very edge of the screen are causing me to like and upvote and click on things that I don't mean to, because the digitizer actually runs a little further into the paint on the edges than the OEM screen does. Now that is one of the major differences, one of the major things that I never really realized before, because I don't use aftermarket screens. I've had customers elect to use them, and they seem to be okay with it, but they're certainly more sensitive to touch on the edges where you really don't want to be touching things. And if you can imagine seeing something goofy on someone's Facebook page and going, what the heck is that? And you go to open it and it ends up being something, I don't know, that you wouldn't normally like, like maybe it's your friend's girlfriend at the beach or who knows what, and you accidentally hit that like button. That is one of the reasons that I don't typically go onto most social media sites on my phone, because it's so easy to click something on accident. And with this aftermarket screen on the phone, that has become a much bigger problem, and I didn't even realize that was a thing. So I'm careful about that. Where do you get your replacement screens for Galaxy at a good price? At a good price, you're going to pay a consistent price for OLED screens for just about any phone, and with Galaxy that does not change. It's pretty much the price is what the price is. You can buy for some of the Galaxy models, you can buy an LCD that is compatible. I do not recommend that you do that. Everyone that I've talked to who has bought these alternative sorts of displays has been very disappointed in their performance and say that they don't last very long. So unfortunately, when it comes to OLED right now, because there's such a limited supply, and there are so few manufacturers that make them, the price is pretty constant no matter where you go. I wish I had an answer to that. If I could get Galaxy replacement screens for a cheap price, I could sell them for less and get a lot more business. And people have that sticker shock when they find out how much the screen is on their Galaxy phone to replace. I don't know of a cheap source. I wish I did. You can certainly refurbish them yourself if you have the equipment and the training and the patience. But for the most part, yeah, it's pretty much kind of like, it's like, where do I get a good deal on an iPhone? The price is, for the most part, what it is. You might find slight variations from here to there, but I don't know of a good price on Galaxy phones. It's pretty consistent no matter where you go. Do people ever say anything about the aftermarket screen quality? On occasion, but usually, this comes with an explanation. Anytime we sell an aftermarket screen, is that, we have the original here. Here's what the OEM is, and here's how much it cost. And then when they say, oh, well, I heard you can do it cheaper, and we say, well, this is what you're getting for cheaper, they don't typically complain. They may say, oh, I noticed this about it, but they kind of go into this understanding that what you're getting is a lower quality screen. You're not going to get an OEM screen for this price, and we try to make that as clear as possible. Yes, occasionally people still complain about it, and if they want to upgrade, we give them the option. Do you want to return the aftermarket screen that you bought, as long as it's not damaged, and we can replace it with an OEM screen, and you can pay the difference. So, and it's hard. I know people will complain about anything, but it's a little tough to complain when you're given those options. So on occasion, we do, and oddly enough, once in a while we get someone who complains about an OEM screen, and we set it right next to another OEM, same thing. But some people will go over their repairs with a microscope when you finish them and try to find a problem. But not too much. For the most part, we have a lot of repeat customers, so they kind of been through the process. They know what it's like, or they got sent by someone else. And, there aren't tons of people who are doing their first screen repair ever. I mean, we do come across them on occasion. Let's see, where are we? I have a bench and put my hand over it and only move my fingers for micro soldering. Yeah, so, and that's really, I really find myself, when it comes to steadying my hands, this is going to sound goofy, but things are so small when we get to micro soldering. It's almost as if I kind of lean into the direction I want to move my hands. Like, I don't even purposely move my fingers. I just I almost like think about moving a direction, because sometimes you're moving so little and you get yourself to move that way. I don't know if that works for everyone, but I really seriously feel like I'm concentrating on, I wish my fingers would go that way, and it's kind of like they do even without me trying, because there's just such a small amount of movement taking place. The microscope, though, obviously is a big help. But steadying your hand itself, that's kind of the same approach I do. Is I keep my hand, resting on something to keep it steady. My J7 Perk screen is all cracked, but everything is working fine. Does that mean the crystal is not fused to the digitizer, and it would be easy to just fix the crystal on my own? No, the Perks is LCD, but isn't it? I think the Perks is LCD, but it is still going to be adhered to the glass. I need to look it up, but I want to say that the Perks, I just did a Perks not too long ago. Wait, is the Perks a Galaxy? Watch me prove myself wrong. Prove myself wrong. Galaxy Perks J7 LCD or AMOLED? What is it? It is a complete screen assembly for $28. Does that sound right? Because if it is, yeah. Hey, Johnny, I would not try to replace just the glass on that. You can get the whole screen for like 30 bucks. It would definitely not be worth the time and effort, and it's got to be an LCD at that price. So yeah, I would just replace the whole thing. They're pretty inexpensive, all things considered. Unless you want to just do it as a project, you could probably buy the glass and try to remove it. But how are you going to bond those two together? You can't use Loca on an LCD, so you'd want an OCA solution, and it would just be something to do for fun. It certainly wouldn't make sense to do it from a fiscal standpoint. Edwin, how's it going? Where can I buy the stencils used when resoldering IC chips or memory chips, etc.? You can buy them from microsoldering.com. Let me see if I can find his site real quick. And hopefully I've got the right one. Microsoldering. Yes, so you can buy them. Doesn't he have those? Let's see. Let's see if he does. I think Jason Gann has them, I believe. Let me see if I can find them. His site is a little goofy because sometimes when I pull it up, I see a search option, and right now I don't. I think he sells them though. Where are your tools, Jason? Beginner's package, getting started, tools and equipment. Okay, let's see if we have a stencil here. So Edwin, I think that you can get them from microsoldering.com. If you can't, then you can certainly get them from AliExpress, which is where I bought the last set that I got, and you can also find them on eBay. They're pretty easy to get a hold of. They're relatively inexpensive, so depending on how much of a hurry you're in, there are several different places to go. I always try to recommend that people go to other people within the repair industry to buy from, if he's got the same product available. So try microsoldering.com. If you can't find them there, you can get them at eBay. You can get them on eBay or from China directly from AliExpress, and it'll probably take like 3 weeks to get here. That's the only downside to it. All right, folks, it has been an hour and a half, so this went a little longer than expected, but never a problem. I'm going to log off here shortly, and I will definitely be back next Thursday at 6 p.m. I think I might do a New Year's Day, because New Year's Day is going to be next Monday, so I may be on here at 2 p.m. Next Monday. I just have to work out like what I'm doing the night before and make sure that I'll be home and be able to get to my good bandwidth, which is actually working for once, which is awesome. So if I'm not here at Monday on 2, and I'll send out an announcement beforehand, I will most certainly be back here Thursday evening at 6 p.m. and I may even have my extra camera set up so we can get the microscope and some repair stuff going on. I had a couple of people who asked if we could do some repairs during the live stream, so obviously that will depend on what I have on hand, but I would love to be able to plug all the cameras in, including the microscope, and be able to show you guys, kind of what I'm seeing from this side, which I think will be cool. Edwin, you bought the I sent you the practice boards, right, for the micro soldering, I think, if I remember correctly. If so, then if you're buying the stencils, remember you will also need to have flux, which hopefully you already have, and you will definitely want to get some mechanics soldering paste, and I would go as far as to recommend that you also buy some 0.2 and some 0.25 solder balls so that you can experiment and decide whether for your reballing if you want to use the solder paste or use the solder balls, because it's kind of a personal preference. I've done both, and I've had better, I feel like I'm a lot faster and a lot more proficient with the soldering paste, but there are other people, the soldering balls work really well, but it just really kind of depends on what you're working with and what your preference is. So make sure you have those if you're buying the stencils as well, because they won't be much good without them. And you can definitely get the mechanic soldering paste. In fact, if you go to my micro soldering equipment video, I have links to most of my micro soldering equipment, and if I don't have the stencils on there, I will add those no later than tomorrow, because I will go through this stream in the morning and add all the links to all the articles that I referenced here, and I'll also make sure that I have updated that video so you can get a hold of that stuff. And congratulations, man, if you're getting into this. It's certainly a huge feeling of accomplishment when you've successfully reballed a chip, without messing anything up or damaging it, and you put it back in and it works again. And using hot air it's really, really cool. When you get to the point where you have your airflow down, your temperatures right, and you don't fry anything on the board and you don't blow chips all over the place, and you kind of understand, okay, this is what I have to do to make this happen. It's a real boost to your confidence and just overall satisfaction, you know, to feel like you're not wasting your time getting into this. Okay, I think I've covered everything. Did I leave anything else out here? Did I talk about the FCC? Is there any update on that? I don't think there is. You know, it's not completely over. We might still have something, but it looks like they're doing everything they can to take net neutrality away and open up Fastlane. So I might have to end up spending more money to live stream. I don't know if that's going to be it or not, but we shall see. And I will keep you updated on what's going on there. They do have some congressperson back east, I think, who has put together a thing that's really misleading. Like, it sounds like it's going to be good, like it sounds like it's going to be net neutrality, but it still does not prevent the internet fast lanes. So it prohibits throttling, but it still allows you to pay more to get things faster. So like really kind of, I think, achieves the same thing that we were trying to get away from. Jason, Edwin, I will get back to you on that. I think that Jason has this stuff on his site, but I'm not 100% sure. But definitely you can find it on eBay. And in China, they have everything in China, and we can still buy stuff from there. Thank you, everyone, for coming on. I will see you next time. I am going to get out of here, and that's it for me. Have a great rest of your week and weekend.